In this video, I'll be sharing tips for selecting and buying your first sewing machine. Welcome to the Sewing Report. I'm Jen. This channel is all about making sewing and crafts fun and approachable. This is a question I get all the time, and I wanted to do an updated video to try and answer it. What sewing machine do I recommend for beginners, and how do you select a sewing machine? So I'm going to be going over a few different aspects to buying and finding a sewing machine that's also right for you and fits within your budget. The process of buying a sewing machine can be really overwhelming. There are so many different manufacturers, models, features, prices. Sewing machines can be as low as $50 and cost as high as $30,000. I'm not joking. Obviously, I really like sewing. I've been sewing for about a decade now, and I've had the opportunity to try out a few different types of machines of different manufacturers. Now, there are a lot of sewing machine manufacturers. Some of the most well-known ones include Brother, like this machine I've been featuring here, the Brother CS7000i. There's also Singer, Janome, Juki, Bernina, Baby Lock, lots of others. There are very simple mechanical sewing machines, and there are also highly computerized and more complicated machines. Those tend to be more expensive. There's also a very large cult following for vintage sewing machines that tend to be workhorses, but they're also a little bit less user-friendly and they don't have a lot of bells and whistles. You can get sewing machines used, you can get sewing machines new, you can pay cash for a sewing machine, you can finance a sewing machine. So I wanted to get into some of these aspects, and I think when you're new, I would recommend first do some research. If you have never sewn before or you're very new to it, do research, watch channels like this, read blogs, go to online forums like Reddit or different Facebook groups. Figure out what types of sewing machines exist. That's step one. Also think about what you're going to be sewing. Are you going to be doing quilting? Are you going to be sticking to clothes? Do you want to do more heavy-duty projects like sewing bags, sewing leather, upholstery? That will start to get you in the neighborhood of what type of sewing machine you need. Now, the basic sewing machine is called a domestic sewing machine. These are for home sewists, and they are good for different applications, but I will tell you this. I've gotten this question a lot. Many of you are asking if it can sew leather, vinyl, heavier fabrics, very bulky things, and I will say that most regular sewing machines are going to struggle with those types of materials. So if you want to get into very heavy projects, you're going to need a machine that is built for it. One that specifically says it's for heavy-duty projects, or I do have this machine. It's a Sailbright LSZ1, and that is a walking foot machine. It is made for projects like those, but if you're trying to do those types of projects on a regular machine like this, you're gonna have trouble. Even on some of the more expensive sewing machines that are domestics, they're just not made for those types of projects. So you do need to think what types of things you want to be sewing and try to tailor your needs to that type of machine. Now, I've sewn quite a few different projects on this little Brother here. Pretty decent little entry-level machine. I would consider entry-level machines to be priced $300 and below for your retail price for a new machine. Now, there's a very large used market as well, and we'll get into that a little bit later in this video. But first things first, you need to kind of figure out what type of stuff do I want to be sewing. Now, if you're really not sure, I would say you should hit up your friends and family network. There's always someone that has sewing machines that aren't using them. Like they bought it for something, maybe to make curtains, stuck it in a closet, never used it. So if you are really strapped for cash also, or you're not really sure what you want, I would try to borrow somebody's sewing machine. So say, hey, do you have a sewing machine you're not using? Or maybe hit up a friend who you know loves sewing and see if you can test drive their machine. Try out different makes and models, maybe ask them to show you how to sew some very simple things. See if you even like sewing, because if you get into it and you find you hate it, then you probably don't want to buy a sewing machine. I know so many people who have bought a sewing machine and literally never used it. People have all kinds of lofty ideas. Believe me, I'm not the exception. I've got some stuff that I was like, yeah, I'm gonna get into in this, and then I never ended up doing it. The sewing was not one of them, but if you're not really sure if you're gonna like sewing, see if you can test drive and borrow somebody else's machine. That may also be a way for you to buy your first sewing machine. A lot of machines like this one, you can get them used for like $50, $100, and if they've never been used or if they've only been used a couple times, that's a pretty good deal. check out Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist, eBay, see what you can find, go to your local thrift shop. If you can get into a sewing machine for a pretty low cost investment, then hey, you can try it out, see if you like it, and you're not out a ton of money if you don't end up sticking with sewing. I have personally owned machines by Brother, Singer, and Janome, and I like them all. I'm not really brand loyal to anyone. By attending sewing workshops, I've also gotten a chance to try out Husqvarna Viking, Bernina, and Baby Lock, and I actually really like the Baby Lock machine out of all of those. The people that you talk to that are like really pushing you into one particular brand, I would actually be kind of wary about that. Try them all out. I think there is things to like about all of them, and sewing machines are also very taste specific. So one person may love Brother, another person may not. It really depends on the individual, and I wouldn't always go by the advice of someone else. You really need to test out the machine yourself, see if you like it, does it jive with you, and can you see yourself sewing with it? Sometimes certain machines just feel more comfortable to me personally, so that's something you've got to figure out through firsthand experience. And just to get this out of the way, I'm not sponsored by any of the sewing machine manufacturers. Once you've done some cursory research, you also need to figure out what kind of budget do I have? Do I want to spend $250? Do I want to spend $2,000? Everybody has a different budget, and I know a cheap machine to one person is an expensive machine to another person. I totally get that, and that is why I really like to highlight more accessible machines here at the Sewing Report that are available to a wider number of people, like this Brother CS7000i, hashtag not sponsored at all. I bought this machine with my own money. I've been using it for the past couple of years, and would I recommend this machine to beginners? I think it's a pretty solid entry-level machine for someone who's just getting into sewing. I think it does clothing pretty well, quilting. I've also done some small projects like some bags using quilting cotton. I would not recommend this machine to someone who is trying to sew jeans a lot or do leather projects. Just not made for it, but for your basic projects with regular to thin fabric, I think this machine would actually work for a large number of new sewists. But again, just not someone who's trying to sew a sailboat cover or anything like that. There are machines I've seen online and at big box stores that are super cheap new machines, like they're in the $50 to $90 range. I would be careful of those. Not that I'm saying they're all bad, but I think with the entry-level machines, you want to have a good experience as a user, and the machine needs to be good enough that it's comfortable to sew on and that it's not frustrating. I'm a little bit wary of some of those really cheap machines, and I would personally avoid them. If you have a budget of $50 to $100, I would say try to go for a better used machine. Spend your money that way, but I would really try to avoid those like really cheap machines, particularly if it's not any sort of brand. I know there's a lot of off brands on Amazon. I probably wouldn't go that route. I would go for an actual name that I recognize, like the Brother, Janome, Juki has some entry level. Even Bernina has some entry level. Also, there's the EverSewn machine. I've used that one. Now, disclaimer, the company did send me that machine, but we currently don't have a business relationship and they've never dictated anything as to how the content is presented. EverSewn does have different models at different price points. The company is backed by the Bernina brand. I know that for a fact firsthand because I met them at QuiltCon. If you're going to be going new, you can afford it, and you're not quite sure what type of machine you need, I would maybe stick to between a $200 to $400 machine, something from a reputable company like your Brother, EverSewn, Janome, Singer, Juki, and try it out. If anything, you can always resell it, and it's not an insane amount of money. If you don't have that type of budget though, I would definitely go used. Just for fun, I went to Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist just to see what kind of machines were out there. There are so many sewing machines being resold via those online platforms. Just kind of keep browsing and see what's out there. New machines pop up all the time. I would be careful though, because if the machine is old, and there are quite a few folks that are selling used machines on behalf of someone else, like maybe it's their grandmother's sewing machine, but this person doesn't really sew, so they don't know much about the machines. If the listing is like, don't know if it works, you might want to be a little bit wary. I think in the resale situation, the best types of listings are the ones where the machine is fairly new, maybe only used a few times, or where it's pretty clear from the listing that the person selling it sews themselves, knows about machines, and it will say something like recently serviced at the Janome dealer, that type of thing. I think that's a pretty good sign you're gonna get a machine that actually works. And I would be careful if they're like not sure if this works, haven't tried it out, you know, buying as is. Because if you are buying an older sewing machine or a machine that the seller isn't sure if it works, you might have an additional cost of a few $100s by having to get it serviced yourself. So I saw one machine recently, it was a Kenmore, and it was an older machine, but it had just been serviced and had some parts replaced at a real sewing machine repair shop, and it was only $65. So that seemed like a pretty good deal because it was already a low price to begin with, and the seller had gone through the trouble of actually getting it serviced. So I would feel more comfortable with listings like that, knowing that the machine's gonna work. Also, if you are meeting up to do those transactions, be safe, guys. Don't do it at your house. Maybe go to a public place like a shopping center, the police station. I know some police precincts have spots just for doing online transactions like that. Just be careful, be safe. You don't want to be a crime victim. And if possible, see if you can plug the machine in and see if it works. Test it out somehow. But again, you also want to make sure you're doing this at a public place that does not violate your privacy. So just be careful out there. Now, if you plan to get your sewing machine from a sewing machine dealer, I think this could be a good way to go if you want something new. And also, some sewing machine dealers also sell used machines. So maybe their customer upgraded to another one. So you can sometimes find some deals on the machines. Sometimes they have floor models or other types of secondhand machines that again have already been serviced, so you don't have to worry about that. Plus, you know that there's some customer support behind your purchase, so that might be a bit of a benefit versus buying it from a place like Amazon or another online platform. And I wouldn't just go to one sewing machine dealer, go to several in your area. See what kinds of machines they have. You're allowed to test drive the machines and also see what kind of features you like and features you don't like. And touching on the financing, I know pretty much every sewing machine dealer offers sewing machine financing. I will say this here, it's not something I will advocate here at the Sewing Report. I'm not anti-financing, you do what you want to do, but I'm not going to encourage people to finance a sewing machine or push that or promote that here. That's just not really one of my own values, so I don't want to push that onto you. But again, you do you. Sewing is a hobby for most people, and you do need to think about your own finances. So if you can't afford to pay cash for an item, kind of think to yourself, is this something I really want to buy or need? I'm not saying that financing a sewing machine is wrong, but you also don't want to have buyer's remorse after. And if your financial situation changes in the future, you kind of need to think to yourself, will I still be able to afford the payments on this sewing machine? I've not financed a sewing machine myself. I did spend, the most I've spent on a sewing machine is $2,500, and I ended up using my tax refund on it. So I paid cash for it. So I personally have never financed a sewing machine, and I don't think I ever will. And you might be wondering, what's the difference between the cheaper sewing machines and the more expensive sewing machines? It can be the construction. Are there a lot of plastic parts versus it being more of a die-cast metal type of build for the sewing machine itself? Stitches. Basic sewing machines have fewer stitches. More expensive sewing machines tend to have a lot of stitches. Although I can tell you from personal experience, you're not going to use most of the stitches. I think that's something I figured out over the time I've been sewing, is that I mostly just use maybe 3 to 4 of the stitches. I'm currently in the process of getting a straight stitch machine, and you'll be seeing more updates on that here on the channel. But some of the features you think you need, you don't need. There's a needle up down. That actually is a pretty handy feature. Automatic needle threader, thread cutter, how much throat space is in the machine, and that's the space between the needle and the arm of the sewing machine. Quilters often will want a sewing machine with a larger throat space because you need to jam your big quilt in there, and it can be hard to quilt a large project on a smaller sewing machine. So those are some of the features that are kind of popular among the sewing community. There's also something called a knee lift. That's something quilters use a lot, where it attaches to the machine and you can use your knee to lift and lower the presser foot. I personally haven't used that one a lot, even though that is a feature one of my sewing machines has. And again, there's just so many different types of sewing machines. I would urge you, do your research and really try to explore different models, makes, different kinds. There's really a very vast world out there for anyone who's into sewing, and I think sewing is obviously a really cool hobby and activity to do. Let me know down below in the comments, do you have any tips for new sewists in terms of buying a sewing machine. How much did you spend on your first sewing machine? And do you have any advice? Let everybody know down below. But I hope this was helpful if you are trying to purchase a sewing machine for the first time. I know it can be a little bit intimidating, so I wanted this video to be helpful. I also have a whole playlist on beginner sewing videos, so check one of those out. Anyways, I'm Jen with the Sewing Report. I'll see you guys again in the next video, and remember, whatever you're doing, make it fun.